Superintendent Brown, how many police do we have in the city of Chicago?
Right at 11,000. Sorry, right at 11,000, sir.
And annually, with retirements and other decisions, how many do you have to recruit to make up for vacancies?
So we have an annual attrition rate of about 5%. So we'd have to recruit that 5% number. And we're behind because of COVID's impact on our ability to test in a room and scale. We had an outbreak of COVID in our police academy last summer, before last summer of 2020. So we had to shut down our academy due to a COVID outbreak. So we're a little bit behind the curve, but we have a plan to catch up. We have a recruiting team on the ground. But we do have the impacts of COVID and attrition on our department at this point.
So how far behind are we in terms of recruiting to replenish the ranks to what they ordinarily reach?
We currently have about 7,000 applicants to be a police officer in Chicago. We need another 7,000 applicants. So we're about halfway where we need to be. As far as vacancies, we're nearly 1,000 vacancies. So we need to really recruit. By the way, just a shameless plug for whoever's listening. Our salaries are at $80,000 after your training in 18 months, and we have fully funded tuition reimbursement.
You've explained this on the basis of COVID. Is there anything to do with morale that is affecting the number who are applying to become Chicago policemen?
Yes, there is. So without question, the impacts of the vacillations of the political discussion between abolish the police, defund the police, and the hypercriticism of police have done damage to the psyche of police officers, people willing to do this job. Every department in this country is struggling to recruit young people who are not coming into this profession like they have in the past. So we have to be more aggressive in our lifting up our police and really encouraging them that the public supports their efforts and their sacrifice much more than we have.
And could you indicate for us, please, is it more dangerous this day to be a policeman in Chicago than it was last year, let's say?
So last year we had a 500% increase in the number of officers shot at or shot. 500 last year, and we are surpassing last year's number so far this year. It is, without question, not only the most challenging time to be a cop, but the most dangerous time to be a cop.
And could you explain that? There are various theories you've heard. The witness sitting next to you has her theory. What is your theory about why it is more dangerous?
I think there's various issues. I wouldn't point to one thing. Similar to the rise in violence, I think there's some concern about trauma, the impacts of trauma in communities. But clearly, part of the formula for why the brazenness that offenders have is we need more consequences as well. We need some of our people, not going back to the mass incarceration era. No one wants to go back to that, but there are some violent people that need to be held in jail till trial. They're dangerous to the community and they need to be held in jail. That discussion doesn't mean I support or anyone supports mass incarceration. That's just protecting us all. The people who would harm us need to be held when they're charged, when they're stopped constitutionally, when they're in possession of an illegal firearm. They need to be seeing real consequences in the criminal justice system.
I assume you were in the room. If not, I mentioned earlier that my wife and I went to Rita High School for the memorial service for Ella French. It was an outpouring of support from the law enforcement community, the likes of which I've never seen. People were standing blocks long in queue, waiting for a chance to pass by and pay their respects. Can you describe the impact that killing had on the Chicago Police Department?
It's just tragic and resonated throughout. Young cops, very veteran cops, all wept. And we continue to grieve. That was just in August. We continue to grieve her loss. But what is also infuriating is that straw purchaser that bought the gun and gave it to the offender who used it on Ella, causing her death, walked in and out of federal court because it was basically an administrative violation to buy a gun. There was no real serious consequence for a straw purchase of a gun used to kill a police officer. That just, it's the only untoward word I've had to John Losh, which I know is not his issue. But the fact that this person walked in and out of federal court as a straw purchaser that caused the death of a police officer should make us all sear with anger. And the pain throughout our police department continues to resonate.
And I might add, I think we should, the other officer was gravely wounded. He survived, I believe, but
He survived, yes.
he had some serious permanent injuries as a result of that shooting.
Yeah, Officer Yanis is just Carlos is a walking miracle that he's able to walk and stand on his own. And we were with him this past weekend, delivering gifts to him and his family. It's a miracle that he survived. This offender not only shot and killed Ella, but also seriously wounded Carlos Yanis and tried to kill a third officer who was on scene. And thank goodness we were able to capture this offender and bring him to justice.
And you make the point, I mean, it affected my wife and myself personally just to see the outpouring of emotion for Ella French, that this straw purchase is considered to be a bookkeeping offense at this point. When someone who legally can purchase a gun because they have no criminal record are doing so to hand it over to someone who cannot legally purchase a gun. That is more than a loophole. That is just a tragic situation that there's no explanation for. And I believe that that drives it home more than anything I could possibly say. I have legislation to change that. I want to make it a serious offense. But I also have to tell you, I think that the licensed gun dealers have a responsibility too. They know better.
That's right.
They have to know better when someone is purchasing a gun or a volume purchase of guns, that this just isn't for their personal use. There's something else going on here, and we've got to open our eyes to it in this situation. On the morale side of it, let me say as well, I can't recall exactly when it occurred, but I asked for a meeting with some members of the Chicago Police Department, and I met with two groups. And the first, and this was how long ago, maybe one of my staff remembers, I went down to the training academy, and they just put up a notice that said, there's a politician who's going to have an off-the-record meeting. If you want to come by and tell him what you think, drop by. Well, they sure did. There probably were 15 or 16 in the room, black, white, and brown, men and women. Some were 3 years veterans, and some were 20-year veterans in the police department. And we talked about everything imaginable that affected them, at least in the federal debate that was going on at the time. And of course, they had their own point of view on some things. The media reporting they didn't think was always complete and accurate. And they felt that not enough information was given to the public before they drew conclusions about what happened in a given circumstance. The split-second decision which some police were making was somehow elongated in the press version to look like it was a much different experience. But, you know, you must run into that yourself when you're talking to members of the force.
Yes, sir. And it's no doubt in my mind, Senator, you make the right points here, that there is a silent majority of this country that supports our officers, but our officers only hear the loud minority of people who hyper-criticize and really come across as not supporting or even understanding that they're sacrificing their lives for our safety in this country, that they're doing all they can to push back against violent people that would harm them. To the point of making the ultimate sacrifice like Ella French did. And so, you know, I would just echo your sentiments, but I would also ask the silent majority to speak up more in their support of our police officers, to keep them encouraged so that our morale can be boosted.
I want to add, too, that this is important. I think there is an appropriate role for social workers and psychological counselors. There are many times that police are drawn into domestic violence situations which are not really, shouldn't be law enforcement confrontations, but rather there's a need for some psychology and mediation and conversation. And I think those resource people could supplement and even replace many times what the police are doing in their line of duty. But I want to add something that the mayor shared with me a couple weeks ago when she came to Washington. Many of these social workers and psychological counselors are making the point to her that they're willing to do this, but they want a policeman accompanying them for obvious reasons.
Right.
They're risking their lives when they go into some of these volatile situations. Could you comment on that?
Yes, there's no doubt. I've been on the record in my career saying we're asking our police officers to do too much in our society, and we need others to step forward, like mental health professionals and other social workers. I fully support those co-responder models where subject matter experts in other professions like psychology, psychiatry, and other social work respond with our officers. And there may be an occasion where we can triage at the 911 centers these calls to where we can more do follow-up. Some may be about someone taking their medication that obviously doesn't have access to quality mental health care. So again, support the sentiment of others in the social service work coming forward, helping our police officers, and the fact that we're asking our police officers to do more and more and more in society that we just are not equipped to do.
Would you comment on concealed carry and open carry in the state of Illinois? Do you think that the provisions in the state law are overly strict prohibitions on the public?
So every situation that involves conflict, when you add a gun, it's more dangerous. I'm a big proponent in the fact that guns make us less safe, not more safe. I'm totally against this idea of a good guy with a gun from a law enforcement perspective, because we can't discern who the good guy with a gun is, nor have I seen a good guy with a gun make a situation safer. Lacking that evidence, I don't know how any of us support this idea of more guns in society.
And also this concept of vigilantism, that volunteers will step in the situation and try to assume the responsibilities of police. The point that you just made, how is the policeman going to know whether that person carrying an AR-47 or what happens to be, whatever the firearm happens to be, how are they to know whether that person is truly, quote, on their side in a life and death split-second decision-making situation?
You won't know, sir, and it will just make the situation less safe. Officers having to make even more split-second decisions about who is this person with the gun, open carry, concealed carry, taking action in a role that they haven't been trained at, nor have we considered all of their biases. You know, this action of vigilantism in Black and brown communities, in my mind, having grown up in a Black community, born and raised in a high violent area, having a vigilante taking action, it just makes it seem like more chaotic, less safe for all of us.
And you allude to this, and I'd like you to say a few more words if you would. The lack of trust between many members of the Black community and the men and women in blue is part of the problem in getting to the solution part, closing the case, taking the people off the street. Have you seen anything that you could point to that is a change in this or a breakthrough?
Yes, so we have seen progress, although we have much more to do in building trust. This year, the Chicago Police Department is solving more homicides than they have in over 16 years. We've solved over 360 homicides this year, mostly due to that trust with the community coming forward. One example is Mr. C, who I recounted in my opening comments, was walking, he was shot and killed. The Asian Chamber of Commerce came forward with a license plate number with video within minutes to our officers, to our detectives, allowing us to capture that offender within an hour and charge him with first-degree murder. Without the community, that would not have happened. So we're seeing progress in building trust, more community members coming forward. There's much more work that needs to be done in building trust, though.
Ms. Ander, there's been a question raised about the bail reform in the state of Illinois, and those of us who have considered this understand that sometimes people are pulled over for a driving offense. They're violating some court order that said that they were not supposed to, until they paid a certain fine, drive again legally, and they're caught in the process of doing that. and incarcerated and a bail is imposed that they can't pay, they are literally in a debtor's prison situation and sometimes jeopardize their job. Have you had an experience with this?
The point that you raise, I think, really is illustrative of the fact that we are missing an opportunity, as I said in my testimony, to both reduce the harms of the criminal justice system, which is the aspiration of bail reform. How do we take the things that create all kinds of unintended harms that are really not providing a public safety benefit, and move away from using those levers so that we can much more focus the back end of the system, the criminal justice system, on the things that are doing the greatest harm, and that really is gun violence. And so I think what has been lost in a lot of the, at least the public discourse about bail reform in this country and in this county, is this notion that it's either we can dramatically reduce the number of people that are sitting in jails pre-trial, but that comes at the expense of increasing gun violence, and that's a false choice. But I would say to do both of those things together does require being data-driven and evidence-informed. And I think that we really have much more that could be done. And I think all parts of the system need to be a part of that working together effort so that we can make sure that when we are depriving someone of their liberty, which is should be an incredibly high bar, that there really is a public safety threat that's been understood so that we're not, as you said, creating a debtor's prison and frankly, net widening and pulling people deeper and deeper into the criminal justice system that provides no public safety benefit.
You mentioned Ready Chicago. I visited some of their facilities, and I've also met with Eddie Bocanegra, whom we all know, an amazing life story, who is proving every single day that many of these souls can be saved if we care and if we approach it the right way. So I hope this violence intervention funding that we're looking at in the reconciliation bill can help along those lines. Thanks to the Crime Lab, you do terrific work. Ms. Swearer, during a July 2020 appearance on One American News, The Tipping Point, you said that is, quote, absolutely false, unquote, that Chicago's gun violence problem is a result of the city being inundated with out-of-state guns. You argued that claim is based on a misrepresentation of Chicago's 2017 gun trace report. But that report does in fact show that 60% of the guns recovered in Chicago crimes originated from out of state. Do you want to clear up what you said in that newscast?
Sure. I would absolutely love to give further context to this because this is important. As other panelists have noted, the reality is that it doesn't matter where individuals, where residents in Illinois are buying their firearms, whether it's in Illinois or across state lines, they are going to be subject to those same background checks or subject to the same laws and requirements that they would be in Illinois. Nothing has changed regardless of whether they're buying it in an Illinois suburb. They're not buying it in the city of Chicago because, as others have noted, there are no gun stores in the city of Chicago. So the fact that the general proximity of many of these gun stores in Indiana, the fact that there is no Cook County imposed extra tax on those guns is very clear that, yeah, there are going to be people who are going to either lawfully or unlawfully buy guns across the border in Indiana. That has nothing to do with Indiana's gun laws. They are simply violating the same types of laws they would be had they illegally purchased the guns from a private seller or stolen them in Illinois. The point is that whether it's across the border or in Indiana, that's not having an effect on crime itself in Chicago.
Superintendent Brown, how would you respond to that claim that out-of-state guns are not a driving force in Chicago violence?
So I would just say this, people who have violent criminal backgrounds who are in possession of illegally possessed guns, regardless of where they buy them from, and the data speaks for itself, is the driver of violence in Chicago. It is without question. The offenders we charge with murder, first degree or otherwise, have a gun illegally, and most, if not all, have a previous violent criminal history. That's just the basic facts. And I always, senators say this, you know, everyone's entitled to their opinion, but not their own facts.
In April, the city of Chicago filed suit against West Fourth Sports, a northern Indiana gun shop, alleging the shop knowingly sold firearms to gun traffickers who in turn sold them to people who were prohibited from purchasing them themselves. That one gun shop was a source of over 850 crime guns recovered in Chicago between 2009 and 2016. I would think in situations like these that cracking down on gun trafficking and the license dealers that encourage it is critical, whether they're in Indiana or any other place. And certainly we've been able to trace many of these guns back to Indiana. I'm hoping that Mr. Lausch can get a cooperative bi-state, multi-state effort, regional effort to bring a close to this. Those are all the questions that I have for this panel, and I thank you for your testimony. This field hearing of the Senate Judiciary Committee has made it clear that we have work to do. Senator Patrick Leahy has a statement he'd like to enter into the record, and that'll be done without any objection. I'm going to do all I can as a senator from this state and chair of the committee to address this challenge. As I mentioned, this is our 5th hearing on gun violence. We'll keep at it next year. I will not stop pushing to bring Chicago the federal resources and attention it needs to encourage collaboration and to support law enforcement. And I want to say, it's been recommended to me, and I think it's good practice, that those of us who appreciate the men and women in uniform who get up every morning, put on the badge that you're wearing and risk their lives for us, deserve our gratitude. And I'm going to make a point of saying so when I see them. We want the very best in the job. We're not making excuses for those who aren't, but the vast majority of those women and men are dedicated to protecting the public for the right reasons. I'm going to continue to push federal agencies to do all they can and more. Going to keep working with the stakeholders in this state and in Washington. I thank our witnesses for attending today, and I thank my colleagues. A number of them stayed on for the entire hearing. That shows your attention and interest in the matter as well. And at this point, the Senate Judiciary Committee field hearing stands adjourned.